The views are out of this world.
This thing is unbelievable. It sounds incredible.
Golly gee, everybody, look at that.
Hey, brother, there's an endless road to rediscover.
This week's drive is a good one, and this is a Suzuki Jimny. Now, I bet you already knew that. It's not just any old Jimny either. It's got a lot of modifications on it, as you can see. We will get to them in a second, but first, this week's road trip. Now, this is an exciting one. It's one I've been looking forward to for a while, and it's one that I don't necessarily think you guys would have thought about. Now, you can see behind me, there's some ocean. What you probably can't see is how windy it is, and you can't feel how cold it is. We are in Warrnambool, down near the bottom of Victoria. The ocean is over that away, the big part of it, and it's a drive that I don't think most of you would have really considered. It's often an endpoint for people who've done the Great Ocean Road. So you get to Warrnambool and then you think to yourself, I've got to bomb back to Melbourne as quickly as I possibly can. Well, not so fast. Warrnambool has a really interesting history of its own. A lot of it's maritime, of course, as you'd expect. So it's got some really interesting history. But this week, we're going to show you an alternative way to make your way back to Melbourne. We're going to head north out of Warrnambool. We're going to show you some stuff and look at some scenery that's nothing like the ocean that's surrounding us at the moment, and it'll be something that you probably never thought of. I've been looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. Let's get into it.
For you, there's nothing in this world I won't do.
This is no standard Suzuki Jimny, but the diminutive little off-roader has already become a cult favourite. You can have an automatic if you like, but for this drive, we're behind the wheel of the 5-speed manual. If you spend all your time or much of it around town in traffic, the auto might be the one to pick. The 1.5 litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine makes 75 kilowatts and 130 newton metres. They're relatively small numbers in modern terms, but more than enough to get the little Jimny up to speed. And Jimny is of course a proper 4-wheel drive with Suzuki's all-grip part-time 4-wheel drive system.
First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been. Oh, ooh, the way that things have been. Oh, ooh.
Now, first up, why do we love the Suzuki Jimny? Well, take a look at it. You only need to take a look at one to understand why these things have become a modern cult classic. It's all about the retro styling. They're boxy, they're slab-sided. They're exactly what the market loves about new 4-wheel drives that really tip their hat to the past. The Jimny's got a long history, both on-road and off-road, and this new retro version has done exactly what fans of the brand would want. Would you choose something like a Suzuki Jimny if you were doing tens of thousands of kilometres and touring around Australia? No, probably not. And the reason you wouldn't do that is because it is a tall, boxy 4-wheel drive with a small engine that doesn't make a massive amount of power, and therefore it's not the most comfortable or effortless 4-wheel drive to use on the freeway at 100 or 110 kilometres an hour for long periods of time. So as such, if you're doing a lot of long distance touring, this probably isn't the 4-wheel drive for you. Furthermore, one that's been modified like this with a suspension lift and all-terrain tyres, it detracts from that touring ability a little bit more. However, what this Jimny does do is really positions itself well as an off-road vehicle, because with a bit of extra suspension clearance and more capable tyres, this Jimny is an already capable off-roader made even more capable with the modifications that have been performed. So, if you're going to do any proper 4-wheel driving, there are a few more affordable ways of doing it, certainly with a new vehicle, than with a modified Suzuki Jimny, and that's why we see so many of them that are modified around the country.
corner like a tired boxer. One hand on my cheekbone, one hand on the rope.
The Grampians, it's one of the most beautiful parts of Victoria, and I reckon it could be one of the most underrated. Now, behind me, you can see Mount Abrupt, and where we're heading today is Dunkeld. It's one of the gateway towns to the Grampians. The Grampians themselves are about 2 kilometres west of Dunkeld, and it's a perfect town to start your Grampians expedition. We're going to take you into Dunkeld in a minute. There's a fantastic old hotel there. We're going to explore that. But this area, well, we talk about European settlement. Indigenous settlement of this area goes back about 20,000 years because there was a plentiful supply of food and water. As I said, this is a beautiful part of Victoria. Let's take a look at it.
The Royal Mail Hotel is an icon of regional Victoria, and it's well worth spending a night or two in Dunkeld, so you have the time to explore the stunning Grampians, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the menu on the hotel's restaurants. The various amazing restaurants at the Royal Mail Hotel are served by one of the most incredible gardens you're ever likely to see, and it's effectively on site. In fact, up to 80% of the produce that goes into the kitchen is grown on site in the hotel's own gardens. There's a heavy emphasis on sustainability across not just the culinary experience, but the hotel itself as well. The produce is organically grown, as much waste as possible is composted. The hotel's parent company is aiming to achieve carbon neutral lamb and beef production by 2030, and produce that can't be grown on site is sourced as locally as possible.
We're here with Executive Chef Robin Wickens. Robin, we'll get to the Royal Mail Hotel in a moment, and how jealous I am that this is your office. Sitting here today, it's pretty hard to believe, but we'll obviously detect a bit of an accent. How did you end up in Australia, mate, and how long have you been here?
I've been in Australia for like 23 years now. You know, had a restaurant in Melbourne and then gradually seem to have moved further and further west. And I've been in Dunkeld now for 10 years.
Everybody that I've said I'm coming to Dunkeld to, whether they've been here or not, says you've got to go to the Royal Mail Hotel. There's a lot of focus now on paddock to plate, as it's called. You've got quite a significant garden that you manage, that you guys set up, that you are all involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have a large kitchen garden program, and working with our kitchen gardeners, we design the garden around the ingredients we want to use, and then eventually that becomes how we design the menus. So we're often asked which comes
I was going to say,
first.
what comes first? Do you say, this is what I want to cook,
yeah.
so that's what I need to grow, or that's what I want to grow, and then this is what I'm going to do with it?
I sort of don't know which comes first anymore. It's sort of all self-perpetuating. But we plan the garden around what we want to use further on down the track, and then once it's ready, sort of a week or two out, we'll go and see what's available in the garden and design the menu. So it's sort of, it's like a chicken and egg now.
This is a silly question, but I like to ask it of everyone with your level of expertise. They always say, you know, when a chef turns the lights off in the kitchen, they don't want to go home and go in the kitchen and cook. But if you've got to throw together a quick meal, what's one ingredient that has to be in it, do you reckon?
Like if it's after work and it's that late, it's probably just something as simple as a toasted sandwich or something like that. There's nothing too fancy.
Taking the easy way out.
This time of night, yeah. But yeah, on days off when we're not working, I'll tend to cook a little bit.
Cook something
a little bit more involved than a toasted sandwich.
Well, you're going to take us out and show us the gardens. There's a little bit of a drive from here. I'm really looking forward to that. Let's go out and have a look at where this amazing stuff all starts.
Excellent. Let's go. I don't want you to think I'm getting all nostalgic here, but there is something to be said
for exploring the countryside through the windscreen of an old school four-wheel drive. This really does feel like it might have been when you were behind the wheel in the 70s or the 80s or indeed the 90s as you were driving through these country towns, even though it's 2023 and we're in a brand new four-wheel drive. And that brings me to the point of this part of Victoria. This is absolutely stunning, and it's hard to compute that you're around about an hour from the coast where we are now. When we were speaking to a couple of the locals in Dunkeld, they're only 45 minutes from what they call their local beach. It's only just down the road in real terms. And yet here we are, rolling country fields, farms, crops, there's dairy cattle, unbelievable mountain ranges, beautiful countryside everywhere you look, and a completely different weather pattern as well. This is very different from down on the coast, and you're only about an hour away. So I do urge anybody who's watching this now who lives in Melbourne, if you haven't been out here, get out here and explore it. But if you live in South Australia or New South Wales, this isn't that hard to get to. You can actually get down here by coming inland, you can run down the coast and then turn inland. There's plenty of different options. But this part of Victoria out towards the Grampians is just beautiful. It's beautiful at any time of year as well. And it really is a privilege to see it, as I said, through the windscreen of what is a brand new four-wheel drive, but it's got a certain old school flair to it. Now let me show you something really special. On this show, we've done cost-effective accommodation, we've done really high-end accommodation. A lot of the time we stay in hotels in these country towns, but what we're about to show you now, I tell you what, it's my idea of remote accommodation. This is architect designed, it's very special, it's in an incredibly beautiful part of this place that we're visiting, and I just love the execution of this. I suspect you will as well. It's a bit of a treat. Let's go and take a look at it right now.
Everywhere we travel around this amazing country, we're lucky enough to meet ingenious locals. But few are as ingenious as the locals who brought to reality the accommodation we're going to find out about now. The team from Ample calls this tiny home Stella the Stargazer, but to simply call it a tiny home is underselling the smarts in its design. This is an execution of the very best in off-grid living. We're with Aaron Shields from Ample. Aaron, mate, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks
now
for
that I'm
coming out.
comfortably seated here, I'm in no inclination to go anywhere. I'm happy to stay here. We stay in a lot of amazing places doing what we do at Drive, but this right here, what you guys have built, what you've created, for me, this is the ultimate accommodation.
Yeah, we're certainly very blessed with the location for the third instalment of this activation series that we've done with the Vic government and Farmers' Daughters.
When you talk about activations, this is a joint project. Obviously, there's a family that owns this land. The dwelling is on their land at the moment. The plan is that you will move this around, that you'll be able to do this elsewhere, but it's a joint project, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, like any good project, there's a number of actors that come together to make an amazing project happen. We've had amazing people that have hosted the building on their land, and we're lucky enough to be able to go to these amazing locations, and it's pretty special to create a beautiful building that's always guaranteed these amazing landscapes, so we're pretty stoked.
Just quickly though, tell us a little bit about the construction of it, because I would imagine even sourcing the material that you've used, it's old tin, there's aged timber. You've had to source all of this before you've even started building.
Exactly. Authenticity is kind of the cornerstone of what Ample is about.
Yep.
So this building is salvaged from a mixture of hardwoods, tins, scrap metal that I myself pulled down from an old barn, and then we managed to dress the timbers back, reveal their beauty, cobble it back together. And the intention was to create a sense of luxury, not with a fanciness or an opulence, but with texture and authenticity.
Explain a little bit about how this works, because it's effectively self-contained. This is designed so that you can hitch it up and move it somewhere else, relocate it, and it does effectively tread very lightly on the landscape, because once this is gone, it's like it was never here.
The whole idea of this structure is to do nothing to impact the landscape and the environment negatively.
Yep.
And once it's gone, there'll be virtually no trace. So it's fully off-grid solar system that powers this beast. It's got tank water, and it's also got a receptacle system underneath the deck, believe it or not, that holds all the wastewater and gets pumped out.
Yep.
So literally not a skerrick of waste from the human beings or the rubbish they create stays on this landscape. So when this activation is over, once we scrape these little rocks you see we're sitting on, once you scrape them up from the fire pit, there'll be no trace of us.
You know, there's a lot of focus when we talk about the modern automotive world on the latest and greatest, the newest, the most high-tech inclusions you can put in a car, battery technology, electric vehicles, and all of the things that we're putting into them to make them as good as we can make them for a modern world. But yet, I look back at a building like this and I'm taken by the thought that the best way to tread lightly on the planet is to recycle and reuse material that's already paid its debt to society. And it's hard to argue that a building like this isn't doing exactly that. Now, there's real intelligence in the design and the execution of this building and the way it's put together. But this building here, in this landscape, the fact that you can move it in and out, and when it's gone, it's like it was never here, that's a mark of true genius. You might look at a proper, dedicated off-roader and think to yourself, why would I drive this around town? However, there is a bit of an ace up the Jimny's sleeve. It's tiny, it's got a very small footprint on the road, and it's kind of like a jacked up small hatch. So if you are running around town, if you do live in the inner city, these are pretty practical. On that note though, space is very much a factor. So if you use your vehicle largely as two-up transport, I'd consider the Jimny a two-seater. I'd fold the back seats down and I'd use that area as a large luggage space, because then you're going to find some practicality. One last thing as well, if you've owned an old Jimny, or indeed the precursor to that, an old LJ Suzuki, like I do, there's a lot of familiarity here. Sure, you know, this is many, many decades later, but the upright windscreen, the seating position, the driving position, the relationship of you to the steering wheel, the visibility, there's a lot of things about this modern Jimny that are very familiar if you've driven an old one. And I think that's part of nailing the retro brief. It's not that easy to make a modern car feel or evoke memories of driving the older model years ago, but I think the Jimny does a pretty good job of that. And crucially, and perhaps this is its strongest weapon in its arsenal, it's a whole lot of fun. Every time you drive a Jimny, it is fun. There's a bit of a sense of occasion. And after all, we do get very serious about cars and we talk about efficiency and cost and serviceability and all those environmental factors. But when you're out on a road trip like this and you're exploring the great countryside, one of the things you're reminded that you think about a lot is ultimately, first and foremost, driving a car should be fun. It should be enjoyable. It should encourage you to get behind the wheel and go out and do that exploring. And that's exactly what happens with this new Jimny. Lake Fyans, it's about 10 kilometres outside Halls Gap here in Victoria, and even in a bit dodgy weather like it is today, it's still a beautiful place to be. This is renowned as a place where you'll find trout. There's redfin here as well. They've got a fish retention program and they put trout in here regularly as well. So if you're a keen angler, you might want to make your way out here. What I love most about this part of Victoria is even if the weather's not perfect, as it hasn't been for our week down here, you can still get a lot out of it. It's still very much worth coming here to visit. Now, we've finished our drive today just outside Halls Gap, and we're about 10 kilometres down the road where we are at the moment. Don't forget that what we've done this week is we've skirted around the Grampians. We haven't actually gone right into the Grampians to do some exploring. Don't worry, we will be back to do that again because there's so much to see. There's some fantastic off-road driving as well, so it's not just on the sealed stuff. But as we said, if you're along the Great Ocean Road and you get to Warrnambool, don't make the mistake of just rushing back to Melbourne. You should head up this way. You should check it out. There's some fantastic towns. Emphasis is on all the local produce as well, amazing restaurants, some great coffee shops and plenty of things to see and do, including, as I just said, if you're into fishing and you come to the lake here as well. Don't forget all of the information on where we've driven this week, the places we've been, and the Suzuki Jimny that we've been driving. That's over at drive.com.au. And we'll see you again next week for another great drive. Our drive this week started at the end of the Great Ocean Road in Warrnambool and took us north through Woolsthorpe and Lovell as we moved on to Dunkeld, where we visited the Royal Mail Hotel. We finished our drive this week in Halls Gap, skirting around the edge of the Grampians and ending in Lake Fyans, where you'll see the wrap-up to our trip. Next week, GWM's brand new tank takes me on a tour of the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. It's a four-wheel drive that's as much at home on the city streets as it is in the backcountry.